I am Eleanor Harper, and I am 76 years old enough to have seen the ups and downs of life, old enough to think that nothing could surprise me anymore. At least, I used to think so. The town of Willow Creek, so named for the winding stream that winds through the willows, is losing the old world charm that once defined it. Every afternoon, I sit in an old rocking chair on my porch, a cup of cold herbal tea in my hand, listening to the rumble of engines from the construction site across the street tear through the silence. The old wooden houses that were once the symbols of Willow Creek are falling one by one to make way for high-rise apartment buildings, modern blocks of concrete and glass that seem to swallow up every corner of my memories. I still remember the house across the street, where the Smith family lived for 3 generations, with its blooming rose garden and the cheerful sounds of children on summer afternoons. Now, all that remains is a wasteland of dust and rubble, a closed door to the past, giving way to a future that feels increasingly alien to me. My life, like the town, has gone through many seasons of change. I lived in Willow Creek for most of my life, working as a dedicated librarian at the town library, devoting my passion to the books and stories that had been preserved over the years. After retirement, my life fell into a quiet emptiness. My husband died many years ago, leaving me alone in the large house that once echoed with laughter. My only daughter, Sarah, is now grown, with her own family and a busy job. Our phone calls have become less frequent, reduced to a few familiar questions every weekend. Are you okay, Mom? Are you eating well? What's new? Questions repeated like a ritual, heard so often that they became numb. Sarah rarely asked more, and I gradually learned to hide my thoughts and feelings inside. That afternoon, as I was lost in my thoughts about life and the ever-changing town, the old landline phone rang. The familiar name flashed on the screen, Sarah. I picked it up, and her voice came rushing through the line, mingling with the noise of traffic as if she were standing in the middle of a busy street. Mom, come over for dinner on Sunday night. There's something important to tell you. Sarah emphasized the word important, and though she tried to sound calm, her tone betrayed an indescribable pressure, something prepared. She repeated the phrase twice, as if she feared I would say no, as if she were forcing me to agree. Something important, Sarah said again, and the words echoed in my mind, sowing a quiet unease, a vague sense of impending danger. I've been through many storms in my life, but this time, what I felt wasn't the usual fear, but the quiet warning of intuition, a mother's instinct. I put down the receiver, looked out the window, where steel frames and cranes were erecting the new Willow Creek, and wondered what exactly was Sarah trying to say, and why did her invitation make me feel so uneasy? Perhaps, like this town, my life was at a crossroads, a change I wasn't prepared for. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows into my small kitchen, casting warm streaks of light on the floor, but not enough to dispel the lingering feeling of unease from the phone call last night. After a simple breakfast of toast and a cup of black coffee without sugar, I headed to the small work area at the end of the hallway. The old computer, which had once been used only to read a few news articles or send short emails to Sarah, had now become a silent gateway into another world, the stock market. It was a passion I kept to myself, a quiet hobby I had begun after retirement. With a meager $2,000 in savings, I diligently learned little by little through books, articles, and investment forums. At first, it was just a way to fill the void when I was no longer busy with the library. But then, I gradually became drawn into the charts, the fluctuating numbers, and the thrilling decisions that I never thought I could make. And over the years, that small number grew slowly but surely until it reached $60,000, an achievement that a humble librarian like me had never dared to dream of before. I scrolled through my familiar portfolio, Most of the stocks were growing steadily, as expected, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, when I landed on Greenwave, a green technology company I had invested in years ago, my heart skipped a beat. The numbers flashing across the screen almost made me drop the mouse. I had to rub my eyes a few times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Greenwave's stock was skyrocketing. My initial investment of $6,000 had skyrocketed to $30,000 in just a few weeks. Next to it was a flashing news headline. Greenwave announces breakthrough in battery technology that promises to transform a global industry. The article detailed a new type of battery that was superior in performance, environmentally friendly, and significantly lower in production costs. Experts predicted a revolution was brewing. The market, as expected, immediately went wild. I sat silently in front of the screen, my eyes glued to the numbers. $30,000. Not a small amount of money for me. I pondered, should I sell now to keep the results? Or should I hold on, waiting for it to continue growing? My intuition told me that this was just the beginning, that Greenwave's potential was far greater than that. Unlike my previous investments, this time I felt a real glimmer of hope, as if life was offering a rare but clear opportunity to someone who had thought he would live out the rest of his years in silence. A thought suddenly crossed my mind. Could this money be the key to something bigger? After a while of sitting still, frozen, I closed my computer, still feeling restless. This afternoon, I had an appointment to visit Ethan, my only nephew and the closest person to me in the family. I walked into the bedroom and picked out a simple outfit to change into. Ethan is Sarah and Mark's son, 18 years old this year, on the threshold of adulthood. In this cold and distant family, he is my rare emotional support. I have always felt a clear difference between Ethan and his parents. Sarah and Mark, with their lives revolving around social parties, expensive brands, and calculated conversations, seem to care only about glamour and status. But Ethan is different. He is quiet, thoughtful, and always has in his eyes a desire to explore something beyond his appearance. He loves reading, listening to music, and often sits for hours in the garden, just sketching his thoughts. I remember the first time Ethan visited the library where I worked, a tiny boy, fascinated by old books, reading so enthusiastically that he lost track of time. That look in his eyes, the way he looked at the world, has long been imprinted in my memory, a look I could not find in Ethan's older sister Ava. I put on a light sweater, soft trousers, and tied my graying hair back. I packed a small bag of gingerbread cookies, Ethan's favorite, and a few old books that I knew he would treasure. Every time I visited Ethan, I felt like I was coming back to life, being listened to, understood, being myself, without having to try to please anyone. Ethan was non-judgmental, non-committal, and he shared with me with a rare sincerity. There was something about him that made me feel comforted, empowered. I wondered if Ethan could sense my growing unease. Could he help me ease some of the vague doubts about the important matter Sarah was about to tell me? Either way, I looked forward to seeing Ethan again, a soothing balm in the chaos that was slowly engulfing my mind. That afternoon, I took the usual bus to Sarah's house. She lived in a posh neighborhood where the paved streets were lined with meticulously trimmed trees, so neat that I felt like I was entering a perfect, cold miniature. Sarah's house, with its minimalist architecture, its wide glass walls, and its cold white, didn't feel like a home, but more like an art gallery designed to impress than live in. When I arrived, Sarah and Mark were busily preparing for a social event, some kind of charity auction for the gallery, Sarah said, her voice full of excitement and a hint of braggadocio. They gave me a few quick instructions about Ethan's dinner and a few chores, then disappeared with the soft slam of an expensive car door, leaving Ethan and me alone in a vast, empty space. We decided to watch an old movie, a black and white romance from the 50s that I had always loved. Ethan, who was not used to the blurry images and slow pace of classic movies, sat patiently next to me, his eyes lighting up as he asked about clothes, lifestyles, and other small details from the past. As the screen slowly moved along, I felt my heart soften, and I found myself telling Ethan about my past, a part of my memories that I rarely shared with anyone. She was a dreamer, Ethan, I began, my voice soft as if afraid that time would blur what I was about to say. She worked as a librarian in Willow Creek, intoxicated by the smell of old paper, in love with the words of silent, living books. Then I told of my first love, a wild, sentimental boy who had painted a paradise filled with hope and a future. She believed in him, in promises that never came true. I paused. Until one morning, when she woke up, she found an empty bed. No note, no trace. My voice broke. Ethan said nothing, just leaned toward me silently, his deep eyes shining with pure sympathy. I continued slowly, as if turning the pages of a memory. She was pregnant with Sarah. In those days, being a single mother was an open wound. Public opinion, prejudice, the worries about food and clothing. She worked herself to the bone, in the library during the day, at night doing proofreading and typing for hire. I told of the sleepless nights when Sarah had a fever, of the first toy I saved for 3 months to buy, of the parent-teacher conferences when I tried to wear the most modest dress so she wouldn't be embarrassed. She had no choice but to sacrifice everything she loved just to make sure she had a better childhood than she had. I didn't tell Ethan about the growing distance as Sarah grew older, about the silence of a mother being left out of the life of the child she had sacrificed her youth to raise. I only talked about love, the only thing left that I never regretted. Ethan squeezed my hand. The simple gesture made my heart clench, as if he had mended a broken piece of me. Then he spoke. "Grandma, I don't want to study business like my parents made me do. I want to be an artist, a filmmaker. I want to tell stories, stories that can touch someone, like I just touched you." Ethan's voice trembled with emotion, but his eyes were bright with hope. "But my parents say art is useless, an illusion. All they care about is money and fame." I listened to him with understanding, no judgment, no rush to comfort. I saw in Ethan something I had lost in myself, a spark of originality, a desire to be real. That evening in the cold house, I felt warmed again by old stories, by my nephew's gentle gaze, by a deep empathy I thought I would never have again. But at the back of my mind, I still had a lingering feeling of unease. Sarah's words kept repeating, "There's something important." The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Sarah and Mark had a way of turning everything into a calculation, from relationships to money. I couldn't help but think that the dinner invitation wasn't innocent. Were they planning something? Bigger, deeper? A request? A proposal? A shock? I didn't know. All I knew was that my intuition, the intuition honed over years of being a single mother, whispered that something was wrong. And even though Ethan calmed me down, the shadow of doubt quietly surrounded me, refusing to let go. When I got home after a warm evening with Ethan, I still couldn't sleep. A quiet restlessness crept into my every breath, like a thin mist in my chest, smoldering and persistent. The uneasiness about Sunday dinner still haunted me, like a nameless soundtrack playing over and over in my mind. I turned on my old computer, the pale blue light casting a shadow on my wrinkled face, reflecting the sunken eyes of someone who had carried too much worry. My hand retyped the stock code, green wave, out of habit. And then the number on the screen made my heart stop. The stock was still climbing, far exceeding any initial predictions. From $30,000 that morning, it was now approaching $60,000, an unimaginable number for a retired woman living on a meager salary as a librarian. The numbers danced not only on the screen, but also in my heart, like an unexpected undertow in waters that had seemed calm. The first thought that flashed through my mind was a sweet light. Could I use this money to help Sarah buy her dream house in Maple Grove? I knew the place, elegant, private, more expensive than anything in Willow Creek. Sarah and Mark had talked about it many times, with undisguised envy in their eyes. In my mind's eye, I saw her face beaming, her surprised smile as I said, "I'll help you make that dream come true." My whole life had been for Sarah. I believed that if I could give her something big enough, something meaningful enough, maybe I could see the closeness I'd missed. But then, another voice spoke up inside me. Not the voice of reason, but an intuition, vague and strong. A familiar voice like the deepest part of my maternal instinct whispering, "Don't tell them, Eleanor, not now." There was no specific reason, just a feeling, like standing in front of a closed door with something dangerous inside. I remembered the way Sarah had talked about important things. Her voice had been too intense, too urgent. I remembered Mark's eyes, a little evasive, a little indifferent, as if in that house I was just a guest, a piece that no longer fit into their lives. Something was being hidden, and my intuition told me, don't believe it yet. I closed the computer, but instead of feeling relieved, my heart felt heavier. Sleep did not come, only darkness and echoes from the past. I stood up, quietly walking to the old wardrobe in the corner of the room, where I kept things that no one remembered anymore, except me. My hand groped for the dusty wooden box, deep in the bottom drawer. The box was a souvenir from my youth, from another life, the life of a girl who had her own dreams, her own desires. When I opened the box, a quiet scent rushed out, the smell of old paper, the smell of the past that had slept for too long. Inside were old postcards, the edges frayed, the colors yellowed. I lifted each one as if touching a lost part of myself. Paris, the Eiffel Tower glowing in the night. Santorini, the salt white houses against the deep blue sky. Kyoto, the red torii gate among the ancient trees. Those places were once dreams. I had longed to set foot there, had longed to wander on strange roads, to listen to myself in a larger world. But then life took a turn. Sarah was born, and all those dreams, each of my doors, closed without a word of goodbye. I don't regret becoming a mother, but I wonder over the years, have I forgotten myself? The postcards are now like faint calls from another version of Eleanor, an Eleanor who wanted to live for herself, not just for others. As I was lost in my memories, the phone rang. Sarah. Her voice was urgent, almost harsh. "Mom, don't forget Sunday night. It's important. If you forget, we'll be mad." Each word was an order, not a reminder. The way Sarah said it made me shiver, not because of the content, but because of the tone. There was something about her voice, like someone was staging a play, and I was the intended character. I put the phone down and sat there for a long time. What I felt wasn't pure anxiety, but a sense of impending doom, something that could change everything. Maybe Sarah knew something. Maybe she was planning something I couldn't yet fathom. But whatever it was, I knew one thing. Sunday night would be unlike any other family night before. And I, accustomed to living in silence and sacrifice, had to be ready. On Sunday night, I chose a dark blue dress, simple yet elegant and sophisticated. I didn't dress to please Sarah or Mark, but to create a thin layer of armor, something that would help me feel stable and calm in the face of the unexpected. Over the past few days, The insecurity that had been simmering inside me had turned into a clear alertness. I was no longer the mother lost in her vague thoughts. I was like a warrior standing before the battle, without a sword, but only with the will, the calmness, and the courage that the years had honed in me. As I entered Sarah's house, a strange feeling immediately enveloped me. The atmosphere was perfectly orchestrated. The dining room was elegantly set, the golden light cast evenly over the table with the exquisite dishes. But beneath the glitz and glamour, a quiet tension spread. Sarah and Mark greeted me with forced smiles, trying to hide something. Their eyes were a little impatient, as if waiting for a prearranged moment. Ava, my 21-year-old niece, sat cross-legged in the corner, her hand still glued to her phone, her eyes glancing at me with cold derision. She had long since grown accustomed to looking down on others, as if the world revolved around her. Only Ethan, my younger nephew, sat next to me with a quiet but sincere gaze. He looked at me, gave me a small smile, a wordless squeeze of my hand, as if to say I was not alone. The meal passed slowly, the air heavy as the sky before a storm. Mark kept asking questions about his health, about his daily routine, but his tone was more probing than caring. He turned the subject to the Willow Creek real estate market, talking about investment opportunities, about homes that were rising in value. Sarah barely looked up from her shiny phone, occasionally interjecting a bland remark about her booming interior design business. I sat there, like a patient spectator, watching the drama build to its climax. As the meal drew to a close, Sarah and Mark exchanged a silent glance, as if a button had been pressed. Mark cleared his throat, setting his napkin down on the table, his tone suddenly serious. "Mom, we have something very important to discuss with you," Sarah added, trying to inject some gentleness into her already hurried voice. "We're thinking about buying a new house in Maple Grove. You know, it's a very posh area, 5 bedrooms, a private pool, a large yard that would be perfect for a business and for Ava and Ethan." I knew this was the big deal they were trying to keep quiet about. I kept my face still, trying not to let any of my emotions show. Mark seemed to be reading from a carefully prepared script. "The thing is, we need a lot of money. House prices in Willow Creek are skyrocketing, and Mom's old house, right in the middle of town, is fetching a great price. If Mom agrees to sell, we can afford a new house." A chill ran down my spine. I was frozen. I couldn't believe my ears. They were actually asking me to sell my last home, just to support their dream of wealth. Sarah interjected, sweet but like a cold knife. "We've done our research. There's a place called Willow Haven nearby, a full-service senior living facility with round-the-clock nursing care, a reading room, a pool, a clubhouse. You'll get better care, companionship, nothing to worry about." Ava raised her eyebrows, her voice teasing. "Yes, Grandma. Living alone is both boring and dangerous. It's better to go there. We don't have to watch over you all the time." Then she laughed, a hollow sound, as if I were just old luggage that needed to be cleared out of the house soon. Ethan immediately burst out, his voice shaking with indignation. "Mom, Ava, why are you saying that? She's fine." But all the sounds seemed to disappear inside me. Everything seemed to melt into a vast void. I was stunned, not by the offer, but by the lie wrapped in the guise of concern. This was not sharing, not a loving plan, but a plot, coldly calculated, to take the only thing I had left, my home. I felt deeply betrayed. All the sacrifices I had made for Sarah, the years of single parenting, the dreams I had buried in the name of motherhood, had turned to dust. In their eyes, I was no longer a person, but an asset, an obstacle to be dealt with. I looked into Sarah's, Mark's, and Ava's eyes and saw calculation, selfishness, and a coldness that made me shudder. I wondered, did they still see me as a mother, a grandmother, or just a name on a house title. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness I had never experienced before. The cold and cruel words of Sarah, Mark, and Ava still echoed somewhere in the air, each sound like a thorn stabbing straight into my heart. All morning, I just sat quietly, recalling last night's dinner like a nightmare that had not yet ended. The disappointment of the daughter I had loved and sacrificed my whole life made my heart feel like it was being squeezed. I had never expected them to be so calculating and selfish. This house, where I had been attached to for more than half a century, where my husband's laughter and Sarah's early years had been imprinted, was now considered an asset that could be traded to satisfy their ambitions. As I was lost in my chaotic and painful thoughts, the phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated for a few seconds, then picked up. A young, professional, energetic female voice came on the other end. Ms. Eleanor Harper, this is Julia from Stellar Capital. I have some very exciting news for you. Her voice rang out clearly, like a beam of light piercing the fog in my head. I suddenly felt my heart beat faster. Could it be? We would like to announce that Green Wave, in which you own shares, has been acquired by Global Innovations, an international technology corporation, for $600 per share, she continued, clear and certain. I froze. $600 a share? My eyes widened, feeling the room sway. I had 1,000 shares of Green Wave. That meant that my initial investment of just $2,000, which had grown to $60,000 as I'd seen it last week, was now worth $600,000, over $500,000, a sum beyond my wildest dreams, more than I'd ever dreamed of in my entire life. The news came as a surprise, even more shocking than what had happened last night, and as a reflex, in the first moment, my heart, still filled with the warmth of a mother, silently exclaimed, I will use this money to help Sarah buy her dream house. I had imagined the moment I would give that gift to my daughter, imagining her radiant smile, the sincere gratitude in her eyes. But immediately, the memory of Sarah's eyes, Mark's tone, and Ava's sarcastic smile flooded back. Those sweet words mixed with calculation, that fake offer to take care of my old mother, all of it was like a bucket of cold water poured straight into my heart. I felt like an old chess piece, about to be pushed off the board to make way for their cold calculations. A strange, icy calm settled over me. I took a deep breath as Julia's voice continued to flow from another world. In that moment, I made a clear decision. This money would be my secret. No one, especially Sarah or Mark, would know. This was no longer a gift from a mother who wanted to help her child. This was the key to a freedom I had never dreamed of in my life. I thanked Julia and gently put the phone down. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was strangely clear. The pain from the night before hadn't gone away, but it had been transformed into clarity, into strength. The money wasn't to ease my conscience or buy me fake love. It was a passport out of my role as a selfless mother. It was an opportunity, a rebirth. I began to reimagine my entire life for the first time in years, without Sarah, without demands, constraints, or expectations. A new plan, bold, independent, and entirely my own, began to emerge. I would no longer be the resigned and vulnerable Eleanor Harper. From this moment on, I would be Eleanor Harper, the master of my own destiny. A few days later, as I sat reading in the living room, the afternoon light filtering through the sheer curtains, the doorbell rang, breaking the silence. It was my nephew, Ethan. He was holding a cup of hot coffee and a bag of cold cuts. My favorite. Hello, Grandma. I came to see you, Ethan said, a little awkwardly, as if unsure if he was welcome. I smiled and nodded. Come in, Grandma. I'm making tea. We sat in the familiar little kitchen with the gentle sunlight streaming through the window. The coffee gave off a gentle aroma. The bread was still warm in my hands. Although the atmosphere was somewhat quiet, Ethan's presence carried a warmth that I had not felt for a long time. The boy seemed to be struggling with something in his heart. I placed my hand on his, gently. "What's wrong, son?" Ethan looked up, his eyes uncertain. "Grandma," he began in a whisper, "I'm not sure if I should tell you, but I feel really bad about my parents and your house." He hesitated, then took a deep breath as if gathering his courage. "They told you they were broke and needed money to buy a house, but that's not true." My heart clenched. Part of me had known it, but hearing it from Ethan still hurt. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Tell me what you know." Ethan looked at me, his eyes no longer innocent, but the eyes of a child who had seen too many things he shouldn't have. "I know they're not as poor as they say. My dad, Mark, just got his salary doubled a few months ago. I overheard him talking to a partner on the phone, bragging about a huge project. And my mom, Sarah, is also doing very well in the furniture business. She often signs high-value contracts with big restaurants and high-end resorts. I've seen her sign checks for tens of thousands of dollars." The boy paused, as if considering whether to continue. Then he said, his voice dropping almost in confession, "But they spend lavishly, not sparingly. Just last month, they bought a new Mercedes AMG for Dad. It's expensive, Grandma. And last week, they ordered a small yacht for weekend fishing. Mom just booked a family trip to Hawaii for the end of the year, staying at a five-star resort, saying it was a reward for doing well in business." I sat there, silently listening to every word. Each of Ethan's words was like a sharp knife cutting into my heart. I had guessed it, but I had no idea the truth would be so brazen and cruel. Not only did they try to take over the house, where I had spent my whole life, but they also lied about my circumstances to manipulate my trust. They wanted to use my money to support their extravagant lifestyle while pushing me into a nursing home, a strange and cold place. Ethan sighed, his face carrying a sadness that a child shouldn't have. They didn't want to spend their money, so they found a way to use hers. They wanted to keep it all and lose nothing. They told me that she was old, that it wasn't safe to be alone, and that a nursing home was best for her. But I knew that was just an excuse to make things legal. I looked into Ethan's eyes. There was a sincerity, a pain, that I had never seen in his parents. Part of me wanted to collapse from the disappointment I felt for Sarah and Mark. I felt deeply betrayed, as if a lifetime of sacrifice for my family had been rewarded with lies and calculation. But strangely, I didn't panic. My anger was no longer a burning fire. It was ice, cold, clear, and unwavering. Ethan's words seemed to completely cut the last strings that bound me to the idea of motherhood. I used to think that love and sacrifice were inevitable, but now I realized that my kindness had been turned into a tool, exploited mercilessly. I turned to Ethan, smiling, a gentle smile but carrying a strong determination. "Thank you, Ethan. I understand." There was no weakness in my eyes now, no tears. There was only a terrifying clarity, a glimmer of awakening, and if there was a shadow in them, it was the shadow of a silent but inevitable revenge. I knew what I had to do, and this time I would not hesitate. A few days after my conversation with Ethan, I went to the bank. My steps were no longer shaky. Each step was firm, as if I were entering a new chapter in my life. I was greeted by a female consultant, young, neat, and exuding a trustworthy professionalism. She patiently guided me through the forms, explaining in detail how I would receive my $600,000 from the sale of Green Wave stock. As the number appeared clearly on the screen, I felt myself standing up straight, no longer bowing to anyone. It was more than a number. It was a symbol of my own autonomy, of a life I should have lived long ago. I signed my name, a firm stroke, and in that moment, I knew I had signed my own Declaration of Independence. That evening, I was at Sarah's for dinner again. This time, I was ready. No more ambiguity, no more expectations. I chose a neutral color, discreet but elegant. I didn't need to impress with my appearance. My power now came from silence, from what was left unsaid. The atmosphere in the dining room was so stifling it could have been sliced. Sarah and Mark continued the same topic, still the story of the house in Maple Grove. They spoke as if reading from a script: financial hardship, how I should understand my children, how I would be well taken care of at Willow Haven. Their words were sprinkled with sugar, sounded sweet but left a bitter taste. Ava occasionally added a few innuendos, clearly teasing. Only Ethan sat quietly, his eyes following me, his gaze a fulcrum in a room full of lies. When the pressure reached its peak, I put down my knife and fork. The dry sound echoed in the quiet room, like the signal for an earthquake. I took a deep breath, my eyes stopping at Sarah, then Mark, then Ava. No avoidance, no hesitation. In those eyes, they no longer saw a frail old mother, but a person regaining herself. "You're right," I began, my voice strangely calm. "I have money." The air in the room suddenly became thick. Sarah froze. Mark gasped as if someone was choking him, and Ava dropped the phone, the sound of it hitting the floor punctuating the moment. They were all frozen, their eyes fixed on me as if I had just emerged from another dream. I didn't give them time to react. "Actually," I continued, each word as firm as a nail, "I just received $600,000 from the sale of Green Wave stock." The air in the room seemed to drain away. I could see the horror, the greed, the calculation in their eyes, expressions they couldn't hide. But I remained calm, as if I had waited my whole life for this moment. "I will not give you a penny," I declared, my voice as hard as steel. My eyes were fixed on Sarah. "I have sacrificed my whole life for you, my youth, my forsaken dreams, my last savings. And what have you done with it? You have lied to me, and used me like a walking wallet." My heart ached, but I did not cry. I had cried all my tears during those lonely years when I swallowed them back. "You only see my value through the money I have. You want me to leave my own house so you can buy a car, a yacht, go on vacation, while I, the one who gave birth to you, was pushed into a nursing home like an old thing that no longer has any value." I paused, took a breath, and continued in a firm voice. "But I'm not the same resigned mother I used to be. I'm not letting you dictate my life." I hammered each word into the coffin of my old fantasies. "This money is mine, and I'm going to live the life I deserve. I'm going to travel. I'm going to eat delicious meals. I'm going to watch sunsets in foreign countries. I'm going to live for myself, not for anyone else." Ava laughed scornfully, her voice full of sarcasm. "You're an old woman and you're daydreaming. Traveling alone? Who would want to go with you? That sounds ridiculous." But then Ethan, who had been silent all evening, suddenly spoke up. His voice rang out clear and strong, like a wave breaking through the toxic fog. "Grandma, I support you. You did the right thing." Ethan looked at me, not like a grandchild looking at an old person, but like a young man looking up to a veteran. I stood up. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need to explain. I said what I needed to say, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Walking out of that house, I felt light as a cloud, as if the weight of a lifetime of sacrifice had fallen from my shoulders. I left Sarah's house, leaving behind shock, anger, and eyes that could no longer hide their greed. I didn't look back. Every step I took on the quiet streets of Willow Creek, under the soft yellow lights, felt like a new beginning. Each steady step carried a sense of relief. a sense of aliveness I hadn't felt in a long time. The cool night air caressed my skin, and with it came the scent of damp earth and leaves, a familiar scent that now had a different meaning. It was no longer the smell of sadness, no longer the lingering echo of long nights of solitude. It was the smell of freedom. I was in no hurry to get home. I walked slowly, letting my breath mingle with the fresh air. The burdens that had weighed me down, the years of sacrifice and resentment, seemed to melt away with the words I had just spoken. All my life, I had lived in the mold of a devoted mother, a woman who suffered, especially when it came to Sarah. I had locked myself into that role until today. Today, I walked out of it without guilt, without regret. Instead, a quiet but powerful peace spread through every cell. As I passed a brightly lit convenience store, I paused. A thought flashed through my mind. I had never really pampered myself. For years, I had been thrifty, saving every penny, always thinking about Sarah, about the future of my children, and never once indulged in any luxuries. But now, everything was different. I walked into the store as if it were a must, without hesitation, without hesitation. I went straight to the wine counter and picked out a bottle of premium red wine, something I had deliberately passed over for years, telling myself it was too expensive, too much of a luxury. But today, I knew I deserved it. I would treat myself. Back home, I sat down in my usual rocking chair on the porch, where I'd spent hours watching the leaves fall over Willow Creek. I poured the wine into a glass, lifted it reverently, and took small sips. The soft tannins and aromatics spread in my mouth, not just the taste of wine, but the taste of liberation, of quiet triumph. I looked out into the distance, the yellow lights of the surrounding houses twinkling like strange stars. Before, they had made me feel lost, alone, but now they were like beacons, illuminating the journey ahead, one I would take, alone and with pride. I closed my eyes. Images from old postcards suddenly appeared in my mind, bright and vivid. Paris with the Eiffel Tower magical at night, small cafes on the side of the road with soft music, the fragrant smell of fresh-baked bread, white Santorini against the blue sky, winding roads along the cliffs, blue windows swaying in the wind, and quiet Kyoto with moss-covered temples, peaceful Zen gardens, and cherry blossoms blooming like pink snow in the spring sky. Dreams that had been buried, desires that had been pushed aside, now seemed to smile and beckon. $600,000 is not just a number. It is the key that opens the door to a new life. It is a ticket to freedom, a choice I never thought I would take. Now I am no longer bound by the demands, the forced responsibilities, or the invisible expectations imposed by my family. I am no longer the sacrificing mother, nor the quiet old grandmother. I am myself for the first time in my life, putting myself first. After years of living in the darkness of unrequited giving, I realized it is time to live for myself, not selfishly, but freedom, self-respect, a declaration of a life that is late but not late. The gentle night envelops me, but inside me, a new fire has burned, bright, warm, and resilient. In the weeks after that fateful night, I took time to reflect on my life, what I had been through and what I truly wanted. The $600,000 in my bank account felt like a giant door had been opened, opening the door to countless possibilities that I had only dared to dream about in silence. I could go anywhere, do anything I had ever dreamed of. Paris, Santorini, Kyoto were all distant dreams that I treasured like old postcards. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Willow Creek, where I was born, raised, loved, hurt, and raised Sarah, was where I belonged. Even though the town was changing, it still held a soul of memories. I loved the tree-lined streets, the rich smell of autumn, and the old library, where I had lived my entire life in silence and books. I decided that I would never leave Willow Creek, but I also knew that I could no longer live in that old house. It had become a symbol of silent sacrifice, of loneliness, and now of betrayal. I needed a new start, a new home, one that was no longer associated with pain. I began my search for a new home. I didn't need anything fancy, just a quiet, cozy place where I could live comfortably and pursue interests I had never allowed myself to think about before. Then I found it, a beautiful little house in Green Valley, a peaceful residential area on the west side of town, far removed from the hustle and bustle of the developing downtown area. The streets here were lined with old trees. The houses were charming, with a mix of modern and classic architectural styles. And when my eyes fell on that house, I knew this was the place I needed. It wasn't as luxurious as Sarah's house, but it had a rustic, gentle beauty, a kind of peace that I had been quietly searching for all my life. The house was built of light brown pine, with a wide porch overlooking the dark green hills in the distance. In front of the house was a small garden where roses were in full bloom and lavender bushes gave off a gentle scent in the evening breeze. I imagined myself sitting on a wooden chair on the porch at sunset, a book in hand, listening to the birds and the smell of fresh grass in the sunlight. It was not just a house, it was a dream come true, a shelter for the awakened soul. I didn't hesitate. With the money I had, I decided to pay in cash. Everything went smoothly and quickly, as if fate was silently supporting me. When I held the key to the new house in my hand, I felt like I was holding the key to another chapter in my life, the first chapter that I truly owned. I started buying furniture, not luxurious, but definitely cozy and reflecting my personality. I chose bright colors, cream yellow, olive green, milky white, in complete contrast to the cold, dark tones of the old house. I bought a comfortable armchair for reading, a small dining table with a lightly patterned tablecloth, a large bed with soft sheets that smelled of lavender. I chose each item carefully, as if I were rebuilding myself, piece by piece, corner by corner. Moving was not as difficult as I thought. Ethan came early to help me. He did not complain, quickly carried boxes, folded books, and disassembled shelves like a real adult. Ethan has always been a delicate and thoughtful child, full of compassion. He kept asking me if I was tired, if I wanted to rest or have a drink. When the house began to breathe new life and I smiled and looked around, Ethan's bright eyes made me choke up. Not out of pity, not because he wanted to please me. He was simply happy for me, and that was more precious than any gift. This new house was more than a place to live. It was a symbol of my newly acquired independence after decades of living in the shadow of sacrifice. It was a witness to the beginning of a woman once defined by her role as mother, as wife, as the one who stays behind. Now I was free. I could get up when I wanted, eat what I loved, work in the garden, or write things I had never dared to write. The old house was where I had lost myself. This house, it was where I would find Eleanor again. Not Sarah's Eleanor, my husband's Eleanor, or the Eleanor of the past, but the Eleanor of the present, a strong, independent, hopeful woman. And with each breath of wind that passed through the window, I knew I was truly starting to live. With the remaining money and financial freedom for the first time in my life, I began to build a completely new life, a life that had previously only existed in vague dreams at midnight. The small house in Green Valley was not only a place for me to live, but gradually became the center of both strange and familiar joys. I no longer felt lonely. The sweet scent of roses and lavender in the garden every morning seemed to spread a new vitality, gently awakening the parts of my soul that had been asleep for a long time. I started by enrolling in a senior art class at the town community center d'Assur. I had never thought of myself as having any artistic talent, but the moment I picked up a brush and immersed myself in colors brought a strange excitement. My initial clumsy and awkward strokes gradually became more confident, and my paintings, though not yet finished, began to take on a unique character. In the class, I became friends with Clara, a 78-year-old artist with flowing silver hair and a smile as bright as summer. Clara is the embodiment of freedom and vitality. She always encouraged me to try new things, not to be afraid of making mistakes, not to be afraid of looking bad. Clara told me about her painting trips around the world, about the exhibitions where she stood in the spotlight. Listening to her, I felt like another door in my mind had just opened, a door leading to things that I never dared to believe were real to me. I also joined the book club at the town library, where I had been for most of my life. But this time, I was no longer the quiet librarian behind the counter, but an enthusiastic, lively participant in the discussions. There, I met Tom, a former architect in his 70s with a deep voice and thoughtful eyes. Tom loved poetry, quoted old poems, and recounted little-known memories of Willow Creek's history. I also met Rose, a retired musician, cheerful and witty, who often made the group laugh with thrilling behind-the-scenes stories from her touring days. Each of them was a living chapter in a novel, and as we talked, I felt as if I were living in a colorful world where each story was a precious gift. We, late but no less close friends, often gathered in the flower-filled garden in Green Valley. We discussed the books we had read, shared slices of life, failures, losses, and unfulfilled dreams. Sometimes we just sat silently together, letting the afternoon light fall, letting the wind blow through our hair and our hearts calm down. I used to be Eleanor, the woman living alone in the old house in the middle of town. But now I am Eleanor of this place, of sympathetic friends, of sincere laughter, of life blooming every day. Every morning, I spend a few minutes meditating in the park near my house. Taking a deep breath of fresh air, I feel the warmth of the first rays of sunlight filtering through the leaves, feeling my heart become lighter each day. Meditation helps me return to myself, gradually let go of worries and learn to slow down. I no longer rush with time, but learn to cherish every moment, no matter how small. Ethan still visited me often. He became a close friend, a young soul that I could understand to the core. Ethan often told me about the short film projects he was working on, about his bold script ideas. Every time he talked about his dream of studying art and filmmaking, his eyes lit up like fire. But behind that was an undisguised frustration. Ethan's parents were determined to force him to study business, a safe path but not one that belonged to his heart. I listened to him with deep sympathy. In Ethan, I saw myself years ago, having dreams, having been held back by expectations. But I didn't want to let history repeat itself. Ethan, I put my hand gently on his shoulder, if art is what you're truly passionate about, if it's what makes your heart beat, I'll support you. Financially. His eyes widened, surprised and touched. You don't have to worry about tuition or living expenses. I continued, softly but firmly. I'll help you. You just have to be true to yourself. Those words made Ethan cry. He hugged me, a tight and loving hug. I knew I had done the right thing. I wanted him to have the chance I never had. I wanted Ethan to live a full life without having to pay the price of silent sacrifices like mine. Because now, my life is no longer just a personal journey. It has become a fulcrum, a source of inspiration and support for those who deserve to fly far. A few months later, when my life had settled down and was filled with new joys, Sarah suddenly appeared one quiet Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on the porch, sipping hot tea and engrossed in an old novel, letting the scent of flowers in the garden blend with the afternoon breeze. A shiny, luxurious car suddenly stopped in front of the gate. The car door opened and Sarah stepped out. She looked noticeably thinner, her eyes filled with confusion and worry. A strange appearance compared to the familiar, cool, confident image. There was no doubt that she had found out where I lived. Sarah stepped into the yard with hesitant steps, standing still on the steps for a moment before saying, "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't come to see you sooner." Her voice was soft, hesitant, seemingly a little remorseful, but not warm enough for me to fully believe. I closed the book, looked at her, and smiled slightly. "It's okay. Come in." We sat together on the porch, where the rose bushes were swaying in the afternoon sun. Sarah opened with an apology for that dinner that year, the evening that had completely broken our relationship. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was so mean. I was selfish. I only thought about myself. I didn't understand you." The words sounded slow, seemingly sincere, but I still recognized the familiar calculation behind those eyes. I listened quietly. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. I just observed. There had been too much pain in my past for me to be swayed by a few apologies. When Sarah finished, I looked at her, no longer angry, just steadfast. "I know you're sorry, Sarah, but words sometimes aren't enough." And then, what I expected happened. Sarah started to talk about business. "Mom, the market is really slow these days. Customers are getting fewer and the costs are going up. Mark and I are trying to buy that house in Maple Grove, but it's really hard. The prices are too high and we don't have enough money." Sarah looked up, her eyes pleading. "Can you help me? Just lend me a little, just enough for a deposit on the house. I promise I'll pay you back." "I know you have money, right?" Her voice rose, earnest, almost pleading. But to me, it sounded like old music, a melody of demand, not love. I sat still, my heart no longer beating with pleas as it had before. The anger was gone, the disappointment had faded with the years. I was a new Eleanor, strong and knowing my worth. I looked at Sarah straight in the eye, my voice low and firm. "Sarah, I can't lend you the money. That money is mine, and I have plans for my own life. It's not for you to spend on endless ambitions." I paused, then continued gently but firmly. "If you really want to maintain a relationship with your mother, the prerequisite is respect. You must respect her decision, respect the person she is now. She has sacrificed her whole life for you. Now it is time for her to live for herself." Sarah bowed her head, silent. I sighed. I knew she hadn't changed, or if she had, not enough to become a different person, but I didn't want to cut her off completely. She was still my daughter, my flesh and blood. "Come to dinner with me on Sunday night," I said softly, as if opening a small door. "Just the two of us. No money, no house. We'll talk like adults." I looked at Sarah, my eyes no longer fierce, but softened with a fragile hope. I had no illusions about a miraculous change in her. No one changes overnight. But I had learned something important. I couldn't control or fix other people, especially those who didn't want to change. I couldn't force Sarah to love me the way I wanted her to. I am in control of my life, how I love myself, and how I set boundaries with those around me. I will not let myself be taken advantage of again. The Eleanor that Sarah once thought was easy and weak is no more. My life, from now on, is my own to choose, and no one else has the right to steer it ever again. Late in the afternoon, a few weeks after my lingering encounter with Sarah, I sat back in my familiar wicker chair on the porch, quietly watching the sunset spread over the lush green hills of Green Valley. The sun was slowly disappearing behind the distant trees, leaving the sky dyed in a range of vibrant colors, from deep blue to light purple, then to pink-orange like an oil painting drying in the wind. The scent of flowers from the small garden wafted lightly through the air, mingling with the chirping of birds to create a gentle soundtrack for the quiet afternoon. Everything evoked a feeling of fullness, of peace. as if life had finally let go of its harshness and embraced me with a belated tenderness. I placed the old box of memorabilia on my lap, something I had avoided for years, as if it were a place of nameless sorrow. But this time, when I opened the lid, I felt no pang of pain or regret. Instead, there was a strange sense of serenity, as if the past had been neatly wrapped up and I could finally let it go. I took out a weathered postcard. On it, in soft handwriting, was a quote: "It's never too late to live the life of your dreams." I read it over and over again, each time feeling it more deeply, and then smiled. It wasn't just a saying, it was a truth that had taken me almost a lifetime to believe and embrace. There was a time when I believed my life was over with retirement, a dreary final chapter as a silent mother, used and forgotten by those who loved me most. I thought sacrifice was a permanent duty, that I was born to step back, to give way, to endure. But I was wrong. Now at 76, I am no longer the frail Eleanor I once was. I am a new Eleanor, strong, alert, and alive, a woman who lives for no one but herself. This little house is not just a shelter. It is the fruit of an awakening, a symbol of the independence I have regained with all the courage left in my old heart. Every flower in the garden, every chair on the porch is my choice. No one imposed, no one controlled. I have created a new life, brilliant and full in my own way. I have wonderful friends, the delicate Clara, the humorous Tom, the gentle Rose, who do not judge, do not compare, simply accompany and share. We study painting together, read books together, talk about the trivial things that actually make happy days. And I have my own plans, trips that I once thought were only dreams. The first destination is Paris, the city of love and light, a place I have dreamed of since my 20s. The plane tickets and hotel have been booked, just waiting for the departure date. After that, I will go to Santorini, where the snow-white houses are nestled on the rocky slopes overlooking the Aegean Sea sparkling with golden sunlight. Then maybe Kyoto, where the autumn is red and the ancient temples are imbued with the soul of the East. I will not go alone. I will accompany the joy, freedom, and youth that I once lost because of obligations and invisible limits. Ethan still visits often, his eyes lighting up every time he talks about a new film script. He is my biggest spiritual support, a branch that connects me to the future and continuity. I promise to accompany Ethan on his journey to pursue his dream of making films, so that he does not have to bury his desires like I did. I want Ethan to live fully, not bound by stereotypes or pressures set by society. As for Sarah, I have no illusions that a conversation will change her completely. I know that she is still full of wounds and conflicts that need to be resolved by herself, but I have opened a door, small enough, for her to walk through if she truly wants to reconnect with sincerity, not calculation. As the sun set, the last light shining on the canopy like thin golden threads, I knew 76 years old is not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter. I am no longer the suffering grandmother, the one who endures, the one who gives without asking for anything in return. I am a free woman, living each day fully and meaningfully, no longer bound by the darkness of the past, no longer letting others continue to write my life story. Finally, this life is mine and mine alone. Thank you for listening to my story.